was 10 years old at the time, now 27, and my mother, sister, who was 8 at the time, and I had just moved into a basement level apartment. The place was very dark and gloomy, as most basements are, I imagine. It had only 2 bedrooms, a small eating kitchen that adjoined the living area, a small hallway that led to the bedrooms and bath. I can still remember the fact that it only had 3 windows and 1 set of sliding glass doors in the dining area that allowed any natural light in. 1 window was in the living room, 1 in the room that my sister and I shared, and 1 small window in our mom's room. Like I said, very dark and gloomy. We had only lived there a few weeks when at first, only my sister was noticing weird things. Since our mother worked full-time, and I was bused across town to a different school than my sister, she would arrive at the apartment first in the afternoons. She would later tell me about the noises she heard and the strange shadows she saw darting around the corner of her eyes. I clearly remember one afternoon when I arrived home, which was about an hour after she did, only to discover my sister huddled up on the top of the steps that led down to our front door. She had her arms wrapped around her drawn-up legs, her head lowered to her knees, and she was shaking and rocking back and forth. It was obvious that she was terrified. I asked her what was wrong, and all she did was point down the stairs. Curiously, I walked down and started towards our door. I noticed absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. I marched back up the steps to ask her what was wrong with her. Finally, she related this to me. When she came home from school, she walked down to our door, only to find it standing wide open. She knew I wasn't home yet, and neither was our mom. She would have seen her car out front. She walked slowly to the open doorway and peered into the living room, at which time she says the chairs and the dining room table all flew away from it simultaneously, and what sounded like all the kitchen cabinets and drawers slammed shut, their contents rattling from the force. She said she saw the chairs move, but nobody was in the apartment. She then said she was so scared that she dropped her books, let the door standing wide open, and ran up the stairs and sat there until I arrived. I explained that she must have imagined it all, as the door was closed and I saw no books in the hallway. She swore it happened exactly like she said, but I was still skeptical. So me, being the older, wiser, and therefore fearless one, I pressured her into going back down there with me. I mean, we had to go in sooner or later, right? I unlocked the door and slowly opened it, while my sister hid behind me, clinging to me like a cheap sweater. Lo and behold, gasp, everything was as it should be, with the exception of my sister's school books, all piled neatly on the coffee table. The chairs were where they should be, and nothing was amiss in the kitchen. Needless to say, I didn't believe a word my sister told me. That was until I saw the shadow man. A few weeks after finding my sister cowering on the steps, I bought a Walkman radio and some cassettes. We're talking early 80s here, to go with it. That night, I decided to listen to my Walkman after my sister and mom went to bed. I believe it was around 11 p.m. when I started getting the distinct feeling that I was being watched from the open doorway to our room. I don't know why, but I was instantly afraid. I just knew it wasn't my mom. So, since I was lying on my back, all I had to do was turn my head in the direction of the doorway and find out if anyone was there or not. I turned the Walkman off and waited, lying stiff as a board and holding my breath, just waiting to hear anything unusual. I was still getting the impression that someone was in the doorway staring at me, but I was too terrified to look. I just knew that I wouldn't like seeing who was there, and now I was certain that there was somebody there. Finally, I got the nerve to slowly turn my head towards the door. To my absolute horror, there was a man standing there. I'd never been so scared in all my life. I didn't dare to move or make a sound, or even breathe for that matter. I just kept my eyes glued to the doorway. That's when I noticed that I could see right through it. Before I could really panic, it occurred to me that it must be a shadow of someone that was standing out at street level. I rationalized that the streetlights were casting the shadow into the hallway through the window that was in our room. I was starting to calm myself down and decided to prove my theory by turning around and looking at the window that was behind me. As soon as I did, panic assailed me all over again. There was no shadow on the sheer curtains, nothing but the soft glow of the streetlight in the parking lot. I immediately looked back to the doorway, hoping and praying desperately that the figure would be gone. It was still there, only now it appeared darker, but I could still make out the thermostat for the heating and the air on the wall through it. It also seemed to be projecting a seriously negative feeling. I don't understand why I felt that, but I did, and I was definitely terrified. It made no movement whatsoever, and I was able to really look at it. It appeared to be a man wearing a long trench coat and a fedora-style hat. Reminded me of a Dick Tracy kind of character, if you know what I mean. All of this was in outline with no other distinguishing features. No face, hands, or feet for that matter, and it seemed to hover in one spot. I didn't know what to do at this point, and it seemed an eternity had passed since I noticed its presence. It occurred to me then that I didn't hear my sister snoring, which was a usual thing for her to be doing, hence the reason I had bought the Walkman. I figured she had to be awake, so I whispered her name. Imagine my disbelief when she responded, and I could tell she was terrified too. I couldn't blame her one bit. After all, the foot of her bed was only 3 feet from the doorway, and it. I whispered to her, "Do you see it?" "Yes," she hissed, and then started whimpering. "We have to get out of here. On the count of 3, we run as fast as we can to Mom's room." So much for me being the fearless one. She didn't want to, but I wasn't staying, that was for sure. Our escape would mean running through the thing, but at that point, I didn't see any other options. I counted the 3, bounded off the bed, grabbed my sister from her bed, and we were both screaming and running hellbent for leather from my mom's room down the hall. We jumped into the bed with her. She was already sitting up, having heard us screaming. I don't recall what she said, or what we even told her. It seems I just passed out from the fright. My mom didn't ask us about what had happened the next day, and my sister, nor myself, brought it up then. Maybe my mom didn't need to ask, who knows. We never saw the Shadow Man after that, thank God. As it happened, we moved out shortly thereafter. I don't think it was a coincidence either. Our lease wasn't up until 6 more months. I didn't complain, and neither did my sister. We never spoke of it until I brought it up to her during a phone conversation in 1996 when I was telling her about my new haunted house. I'll send some of those stories later. We were both surprised that the other remembered the incident so clearly. After all those years, the details of that night were still very clear to the both of us. This was my very first ghostly encounter. I hope you enjoyed it. It's exactly how I remember it, and of course, I could never forget the Shadow Man. This event happened while I was back in Pine Ridge, visiting family. In Pine Ridge, there is no rhyme or reason to where cemeteries are placed. There are numerous little cemeteries on hilltops and mixed in with the various homes. Then there is a main cemetery behind Red Cloud School where lots of weird stuff happens there as well. I don't go back to visit very often, and because of this, I'm not nearly as superstitious as the locals when it comes to hanging around cemeteries. One of the superstitions which I found out the hard way is the real deal, is to never go around a graveyard at dusk, and be careful who you talk to or see in the cemetery. By my cousin's house is a cemetery within walking distance, on a small hill that looks over the street that she lives on. I don't actually know anybody buried in the cemetery, since all of my family is buried in either Red Cloud Cemetery or St. Anne's Cemetery. At the time of this story, my cousins both had small daughters, and they would come by and visit often. My cousin had mentioned that he had gone up to the cemetery on the hill one evening to clean the area up a little, and while he was there, he saw an old woman dressed in black, standing by an older grave crying. He didn't recognize her and walked up closer to see if she was alright. He approached her, and when she turned around, she only had eyes but no face. My cousin was very scared and hightailed it out of there. What he didn't realize was he brought a visitor back with him. After this happened, my aunt started hearing things in the house, and small objects would be moved around. They figured someone had come down from the cemetery. My aunt is a kind of new ager, so she didn't find this to be upsetting. She just accepted it. While I was there one day during broad daylight, I was sitting in the living room and I saw a little girl walking down the hall, and she walked into the bedroom. I'd been there only a couple of days, so I thought it was one of my two cousins' little daughters. I wondered if my cousins had pulled up and she had come into the house. So I called out and then got up and looked. Nobody was there. I went to my aunt and asked if my cousins and their kids were there. She said no. I then told her, well, some kid just walked down the hallway. Turns out, it was the little dead girl from the graveyard. I was really freaked out because after that, she started making her presence more known. For instance, I would wake up in the middle of the night and the bedroom light would be on, the door would be open, I would shut it, and it would open up back again. Weird stuff like that. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well until I left. This story happened when I was 18 years old. My friend Chris had just moved to Reno, Nevada, about 30 miles north of Carson City, into her first apartment. This apartment was a regular run-of-the-mill one-bedroom apartment, nothing special, and within the budget of someone just getting out of high school. When Chris was moving in with the help of a boyfriend and some other friends, there was still some junk in the apartment from the previous tenant. You know, when you first move into a place, there are little scraps of paper, pins, buttons, etc., especially in the closets and stuff. Well, while they were cleaning up, they found a driver's license. It was a guy's license, and he was over 21. We all know where this is headed, right? Anyway, Chris's then boyfriend, who was under 21, figured this was a real lucky find. He could use it to go out and get into the clubs and go drinking in the casinos. We all had false IDs back then, but having an unaltered license was the best. Chris got moved into the apartment, and initially, everything was going great. But then she started to notice some odd things happening in and around her apartment. For starters, whenever she would come home, the light in the walk-in closet would be on. At first she just thought that she had left it on when she was getting dressed, but after a few more times, when she was sure that she had turned it off and then it was on, she started getting a little freaked out about it. After this had gone on a while, the window in her bedroom would also be found open. She even went so far as to lock and nail it shut. Sure enough, she got back from work, and it was open. Small things also began to be misplaced, and then show up somewhere else in the apartment. Finally, one night Chris, her boyfriend, and a group of friends went out to a club called the Premier Club in Reno. When they were standing at the door, waiting to get in, the bouncer was, of course, doing the prerequisite ID checks. When the bouncer got to Chris's boyfriend, who had used this ID already numerous times before, he took a look, stopped, and then got really angry. He kept saying over and over, "This isn't you, this is not you." And of course, Chris's boyfriend started to sweat the load because he thought for sure he had somehow been found out. He tried to bluff, saying yes, it was him, but the bouncer only stared back at him and said, "I know this guy," and repeated, "This isn't you." As it turns out, the young man who the ID did belong to was the one that was found in Chris's closet. Not long before, he had hung himself in that same very closet and was found dead there. Needless to say, Chris moved out of the apartment pronto. Anyone who has ever served in the Navy has certainly heard a ghost story or two. Although deaths in peacetime on board naval ships is rare, it does occasionally happen, usually due to mishaps or suicide, and, although rare, murders occur as well. This particular ship was a destroyer, and this destroyer was haze gray and underway most times. When a ship is underway, one must perform their usual duties, plus collateral duties, and stand various watches. The watches that can be the longest are when you are standing out on the ship, somewhere at night in the middle of the ocean. There had been various rumors aboard this particular ship that people saw someone walking around the ship in places that they didn't belong, and when challenged, would simply disappear. One night, a friend of mine had the watch. It was around 1 a.m. or so, and he was standing out by the fantail after having walked around and was having a smoke. He was of course still looking around, but in the middle of the night, there isn't anyone to see. Suddenly, he saw a shape that was darker than the rest of the dark, standing silhouetted by the tower area of the ship. This was an area that a person wouldn't have any business being in at that time of night, so my friend D yelled out, "Hey, you up there!" He expected for someone to yell back down. Instead, the person ran straight up the side of the tower and onto the radar equipment. There is no way that a real person could have done this. It had the outline of a man and was the same size as a shipmate would be. Once he reached the top of the tower, he just vanished. My friend D came back down after his watch and started talking about the weird crap he just saw, and of course, that's when the other stories started rolling in. Turns out, at times, sound-powered phones through the ship would ring even if they weren't in use at the time. Even the phones on board the ship, which are usually out of service when the ship is underway, would ring. If someone picked the phone up, they would just hear static and silence. Other men reported that they had seen a man walking around corners and disappearing from the passageways before anyone could catch up with them. Others had also seen the sailor out on various parts of the ship at night. But did someone die on board? Chances are, somewhere along the line someone has. But who was this? No one ever did find out. The first story I told you about my house in Spur was the first time that anything strange had ever happened there, but it sure wasn't the last. First, I think I should give you a little background information. When I lived in Spur, I was married to a guy named Gary. He died of a major heart attack in November of 1991. I lived in the house until June of 1992. During those 8 months, my house became what I would like to call very lively. This story isn't really scary, but it does prove that not all ghosts have to be terrifying. When my husband died, I was devastated. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I could go on, or if I even wanted to. I cried constantly. Everything I saw or heard always seemed to remind me of him. About 2 weeks after he died, I sent my daughter Trina to my mother's house for the night. I hadn't been alone even once since Gary's death, and I felt that I needed the time alone. I knew I would most likely spend most of the evening crying again, and I knew my poor daughter needed a break from my crying. I had to get my grief under control for my daughter's sake, and I hoped that by being alone, I might be able to come to terms with my feelings and so on. I watched TV for a while, cleaned the house, and ate a small luncheon for supper. It had been 3 hours and I still didn't cry. I was proud of myself for that. I started to get tired, so I turned off all the lights and laid on the couch. I tried hard to resist it, but the tears came anyways. I was crying harder then than ever before. It hurt so bad, then I began to imagine a way to make it stop hurting. I thought if I could go to sleep and never wake up, I could be with him again. Suddenly, a cool breeze, not a cold one, just a cool one, seemed to drift across my face, and with it came the scent of Gary's favorite cologne. I sat up on the couch and scanned the room, thinking that he was going to appear, and all of this had just been a terrible nightmare. I saw nothing, but I could smell his cologne even stronger. My heart began to race, and I knew that it was there with me. Then I noticed that it felt like somebody had just sat down next to me, because the couch springs seemed to groan a little, and I knew it wasn't me because I hadn't moved. The funny thing was, I wasn't scared. For the first time since his death, I felt safe, and I knew I would be okay. I leaned back against the couch and just let what I knew was Gary comfort me with his presence. I cried, and I told him how much I loved him and missed him. I remember thinking how wonderful it would be to be in his arms once more. Incredibly enough, I felt what seemed like someone putting their arms around me very gently. I can remember feeling so happy and contented. I closed my eyes and fell asleep in my husband's arms. When I awoke the next morning, I faced the day with new hope and a happiness inside that I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew he wanted me to go on for my daughter's sake. I remember telling him that I would survive for our child. I finally felt like I could let him go, and I told him that before I went to pick up Trina. The only thing was, Gary never really left. Many other things happened that I knew was him, but I didn't mind. It was comforting to know that he was always there with me. Not all the things that happened in the house were good though. Some were downright mean and cruel. I know that Gary would never be so mean and cruel, so I can only assume that there was another presence there in my house. But that's another story. What? What? You're saying the video is over? I can't watch any more videos? Well, of course you can. Look at my archive. I've got over 200 videos for you guys to watch. Ha, yeah, well, you better like, comment, and subscribe to this video because that's what matters most. Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't click out of the outro yet. There's a comment section below. At least comment something nice, you know? It's not like I'm coercing you or anything. I just want to make sure that I'm not as lonely as possible when I upload this video. I don't want to see 0 comments in my comment section because I love you guys so much. Okay, I'm just gonna calm down now. Please, for the love of God, please share this video, please. And with that, my crazy man routine is over, guys. Sorry about that. I just got a little too happy here that we released another video. But I'm gonna go. So, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you guys as always. Bye-bye. P.S. I can assure you I'm not that crazy. Okay, well, maybe just a little bit. Bye.